Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to sqadia.com. My name is Muhammad Osama, and today we are talking about introduction to the nervous system and anatomy. And the topic that we're going to talk about right now is the central nervous system, and specifically, we're going to talk about the different parts of the brain in the central nervous system. So, in the previous lecture, we overviewed the central nervous system a little bit, and we also talked a little bit about the brain. But in this specific part, we are going to look into a slight detail of the different divisions of the brain, which is the hindbrain, midbrain, and forebrain. So here we can see in this picture, we have the forebrain consisting of the telencephalon and diencephalon. Diencephalon consisting of thalamus and hypothalamus. The midbrain, which is also called as the mesencephalon, and the hindbrain, which is the metencephalon and myelencephalon, consisting of the cerebellum, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. So let's take a look at all of these structures one by one, starting off from the medulla oblongata. So medulla oblongata is the distalmost part of the brain and the distalmost part of the hindbrain as well. The medulla oblongata is actually conical in shape and connects the pons superiorly to the spinal cord inferiorly, which is the other part of the central nervous system other than the brain. It contains many collections of neurons called nuclei and serves as a conduit or a passageway for ascending and descending nerve fibers from the ascending and descending tracts of the spinal cord and the brain. So looking at this picture, we can see that this is the medulla oblongata, and it is continuous with the spinal cord below, and it is continuous with the pons above, which is also part of the hindbrain. It also communicates with the cerebellum through the cerebellar peduncles. Pons, on the other hand, is situated on the anterior surface of the cerebellum and superior to the medulla oblongata and inferior to the midbrain. The pons actually acts as a bridge, and it derives its name from the large number of transverse fibers on its anterior aspect connecting the two cerebellar hemispheres, which is also a part of the hindbrain located posterior to the pons. It also contains many nuclei, and ascending and descending nerve fibers pass through the pons as well. Now cerebellum lies within the posterior cranial fossa at the posterior aspect of the skull, and it is located posterior to the pons and the medulla oblongata. It consists of two laterally placed hemispheres which are connected by a median portion called as the vermis, that we're going to take a look at the picture in the next slide. The cerebellum is connected to the midbrain by the superior cerebellar peduncles. It is also connected to the pons by the middle cerebellar peduncles, and it is also connected to the medulla oblongata by the inferior cerebellar peduncles. So it is in connection with the whole of the brain stem. The peduncles are composed of large bundles of nerve fibers connecting the cerebellum to the remainder of the nervous system. So if we take a look at this picture, so we have two laterally placed hemispheres which are connected in the center via the mid portion, which is called as the vermis. Now there are three lobes of the cerebellum, which is actually the anterior lobe, the posterior lobe, and the flocculonodular lobe. These lobes are formed because of two fissures, which is the primary fissure and the posterolateral fissure. If we talk about the primary fissure, it divides the cerebellum into anterior lobe and the posterior lobe, and the posterolateral fissure divides the cerebellum into posterior lobe and the flocculonodular lobe. And here we can see that there are the two zones, the intermediate zone and the lateral zone of the cerebellum as well in this picture. And here we can see the cerebellum once again, and once again we can see that this is the anterior lobe, the one in the red color, the one in the bluish purple color is the posterior lobe, and one in the green color is the flocculonodular lobe. And once again, this is the one hemisphere, this is the second hemisphere, and they are joined in the center via the medially located vermis. The surface layer of each cerebellar hemisphere is called the cortex, similar to the cerebrum, in which we call it the cerebral cortex, and here we call it the cerebellar cortex. And it is composed of gray matter, similar to the cerebral cortex as well. Now, the cerebral cortex is thrown into numerous folds or folia, separated by closely set transverse fissures, as we can see in this picture very clearly. The certain masses of gray matter are also found in the interior of the cerebellum where the white matter is present, and the largest of these uh, portions or masses of gray matter embedded in the white matter are the dentate nuclei. So dentate nucleus is one of the largest of these masses of gray matter in the white matter of the cerebellum. Now midbrain is present between the forebrain and the hindbrain, and it is a very narrow part of the brain that connects the forebrain and the hindbrain. So the narrow cavity of the midbrain is actually the cerebral aqueduct, which connects the third and fourth ventricle. So here you can see this is the third ventricle, and here is the cerebral aqueduct, and it is connecting it with the fourth ventricle. So third ventricle, this narrow cerebral aqueduct, and fourth ventricle. So it is connecting the two ventricles. And the midbrain contains many nuclei and bundles of ascending and descending nerve fibers from the tracts of the spinal cord and the brain. Now, diencephalon. The diencephalon is almost completely hidden from the surface of the brain, and it is part of the forebrain, and it consists majorly of the thalamus and the hypothalamus. The thalamus located dorsally and the hypothalamus located ventrally. The thalamus is actually a large egg-shaped mass of gray matter that lies on either side of the third ventricle. So there are two thalami in the brain, and the hypothalamus forms the lower part of the lateral wall and floor of the third ventricle. So if we take a look at this picture, so this is the thalamus, and here we have the hypothalamus, and this is the pituitary gland, and this is the epithalamus. So this egg-shaped structure is the thalamus, and it is a very important relay center and location for the different type of fibers to pass through if they wish to go to the cerebral cortex, or different type of sensory tracts have neurons that terminate on the thalamus, and then from the thalamus they move by the coronal radiator to the cerebral cortex in the somatosensory area. Now, talking about the cerebrum or the cerebral hemispheres or the cerebral cortex, it is the largest part of the brain, consisting of two cerebral hemispheres which are connected by a mass of white matter called the corpus callosum. It is similar to structure like a walnut, and each hemisphere extends from the frontal, which is this frontal, to the occipital bone. So because it is located in the entire cranial cavity, and the hemispheres are separated by a deep cleft which is known as the longitudinal fissure. And we can look at the longitudinal fissure if we look at the two hemispheres of the brain, and when they are joined together, so the line which is in the center separating the two hemispheres, that is actually the longitudinal fissure. And in that longitudinal fissure is the projection of the falx cerebri. What is falx cerebri? Falx cerebri is actually a crescent-shaped fold of the meningeal layer of the dura that descends vertically between the two cerebral hemispheres in the longitudinal fissure separating the two, as you can see here. So this is the falx cerebri. Now, moving on, we have different lobes of the cerebral hemispheres. We have the frontal lobe here, as you can see. We have the parietal lobe, we have the occipital lobe, and we have the temporal lobe. So frontal, parietal, occipital, and temporal, similar to the different bones of the skull. The frontal bone, the temporal bone, the parietal bone, and on the back is the occipital, and similarly is the parts or the lobes of the brain. Another important thing about the brain, if you look at the structure of the cerebral hemispheres, we have the sulci and gyri. The sulci are actually the depressions, and gyri are actually projections. For example, a very important sulci is this central sulcus, which is this, and anterior to the central sulcus is the motor part of the cerebral cortex, or the motor cortex, and behind central sulcus is the somatosensory cortex or the sensory cortex, and it is a very important sulcus, and these projections are actually the gyri here. And if we talk about the organization or the functional organization of the different parts of the cerebral hemispheres or the cerebral cortex. So we have this central sulcus, anterior to which, as I already said, is the motor cortex, and posterior to which is the sensory cortex. So this is the somatosensory area, and this is the somatosensory association area. Similarly, this is the primary motor cortex, and this is the somatic motor association area. And this is the frontal lobe, this is the parietal lobe, this is the occipital lobe, and this is the temporal lobe. In the temporal lobe, we can also observe an auditory cortex, which has the primary auditory cortex here and the auditory association area. We also have the olfactory cortex, which is a little bit deep in here, and we also have the visual cortex, which is in the occipital lobe of the cerebral cortex, and here at the most posterior extreme we have the primary visual cortex, and this here we have the visual association area. So that is the functional organization of the cerebral cortex. So in this section of the lecture, we talked about the different parts or sections of the brain, the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain, and I hope you learned a lot out of it. So stay tuned, keep on watching sqadia.com for more lectures like this, and thank you very much for watching.